Future Sense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nick Jeans and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, Future Sense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is Future Sense. Yeah, you're tuned to FM. It's 9:46 here on the day before Christmas, Monday the 23rd. Thanks for joining us wherever you're listening. If you're in the Shire, Rainbow region of New South Wales, or the North Coast generally of New South Wales, or a little bit further up into southeast Queensland, you might be listening to us, or you certainly could be anywhere out there in the world and listening to us on bayfm.org, either directly, live, or possibly after the broadcast. And more importantly, or just as importantly, you can tune into our edited podcasts within a couple of days of each broadcast through futuresense.it is the portal, the easy portal. But if you have already, for example, the iTunes app, then you can access Future Sense right there and then.
You might also be on another planet 30,000 years in our future and catching these radio waves.
And
so,
going, these guys knew what was going on back then. They actually had some of the real stuff. Thank goodness for that. Somebody knew what was going on. Let's hope so.
Right.
We want to talk a little bit. About utopias today. The word utopia was coined, as many of you would know, by Thomas More. That's M-O-R-E. There's a few Thomas Mores who are famous, but this guy goes back to the 15th and 16th century, born in 1478, died in 1535. And it was the name of the island described in his book, which was originally written in Latin, but he based his new word that he created on Greek. He combined topos, place or where, with you or u or no, which sort of means nowhere. So in a way, it's a nowhere place, a place that doesn't exist, and I think that's exactly how we might configure it now. The concept of utopia has existed in many different religions, even so in societies since ancient times. The term itself was originated by Thomas More in that early 16th century book of the same name. He suggests that utopia, or good place or nowhere place, is a better descriptor than the previous descriptions of this idea. And from Thomas More's original coinage, the word utopia has been conflated with utopia as the Greek e-utopia to mean a non-existent good place. So there's a confusion there straight away.
You're going to have to dig out that Talking Heads song, you know that, don't you?
Oh, which one? The
Road to Nowhere.
Ah, good. Yeah.
It's
Perfect.
interesting. I mean, this topic is quite relevant to the present day. Yes. As well, because as we move into a communal value system, and I'm talking here about this consciousness shift that's underway beyond the scientific, industrial, individually oriented way of being human into a new communal value system, it's all about conforming. So when we come together in these communal value systems, we have to agree new ways of being and new ways of getting on with each other, and often part of that process is reaching back to older ways of communal living and remembering how to do that. And inevitably in the transition period, we look at the way things have been and we decide that it was pretty bad and it didn't work so well and things ought to be a different way. And this usually actually gives rise to fundamentalist and utopian ideas. And certainly we've been seeing a lot of that lately. And you could say that things like, for example, the rise of Islamic State was a utopian idea.
Yes, indeed.
It certainly seems to have been a road to nowhere for a lot of people. But also unbound capitalism. I mean, the idea that everybody in the world ought to be in a capitalist society, and if you haven't got some, we'll give it to you. You know, it's no different, really. It's just a different perspective. And both of those ideas there have been attempts to force them on other societies using war. And of course they bumped heads big time.
Yeah. I thought when you were speaking of George Orwell's book Animal Farm, which is fairly well known as well as his other great prophetic books, you could say, written in 1945 at the very end of the Second World War. Of course, it talks about a sort of utopian society as an allegory with animals, where all animals are created equal except some are more equal than others.
That's right. And I think probably for a lot of people who've heard the word utopia bandied around, they might not appreciate the origins of it in Thomas More's book, and in fact it was associated with totalitarianism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's many different configurations of it, and a lot of people down through the ages configuring new political social constructions that use the ideas of utopia, including Marx and Engels. Karl Marx and Engels were dismissive of a kind of 19th century bourgeois utopian socialism, contrasting it with their own scientific socialism. So this is interesting, the notion that Marx and Engels actually configured that they actually were doing science with their version of what ended up being what we now know as socialism or Marxism.
I thought that was a shop in England, Marx and Engels, but I'm confused. No, please go on.
I think it's Marks and Spencer.
Oh, right,
Marks
yes.
and Spencer. I haven't shopped there, though. You might have shopped there. I love Arthur C. Clarke. There's an article here quoting pieces of Arthur C. Clarke had one quote on utopias from 2001: A Space Odyssey, the book, and he said that the newspapers of utopia would be terribly dull. And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Because there is this configuration, especially, I guess, now coming back to Claire W. Graves' work in this era, where the green layer 6 in Graves' configuration is emerging on the planet in many places. A very fine example in this region here. And this notion of utopia sort of is being configured into that expression too, to some degree, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And there is this shadow aspect to the layer 6 value system which harps back to the egocentric layer 3. And each of the value systems in the first tier, the first 6 value systems, have this shadow relationship to the value system 3 layers down, and which is always on the opposite side of the spiral. So if it's a communal value system like layer 6, its shadow aspect is an individual influential value system, layer 3, which is egocentric. Yeah. And so you do see this self-centered aspect playing out in layer 6, and perhaps one of the most amazing examples of that is the selfie. Yeah. where we seem to be obsessed with taking photos of ourselves.
This idea of contradiction and hypocrisy within the configurations of utopia is quite common. I'm quoting here from an article from the New Yorker from 2016. This shadow of the promise of a better world and the sordid realities of human nature that actually underpin things anyway, and it's a bit of a negative sort of take. But what you're saying there, that while there might be a claim for some sort of utopian vision of how we should all be in perhaps a neo-socialist reality, the truth is that there's way too many contradictions and hypocrisies about that, because human nature is human nature. And in fact, Thomas More himself, interestingly, you may not know this, he envisaged this paradise where men and women could choose their religion without fear of violence or coercion. But in practice, Thomas More was the Lord Chancellor of England at the time, and he oversaw the burning of at least 6 Protestants and the jailing of some 40, and one merchant was tortured, in fact, in More's own home during the time that he wrote Utopia.
Goodness me.
And tied so tightly to a tree that blood reportedly flowed from his eyes, and More referred to this as the tree of truth. And that sort of coercion into the ideas of utopia is a pretty common thing right there and then.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Human nature, hey? My goodness.
Goes on and on. I mean, even the Third Reich, you could argue, at the time of Hitler, could be said to be a kind of utopian vision of, Aryan purity.
That's
and all
right.
That sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It is very interesting. And it certainly shows up in these communal value systems, and I think probably is certainly becomes visible during the transition period, where there's a strong rejection of the old value system, the old paradigm, and in our case, the scientific industrial paradigm is being strongly criticised and labelled as wrong, and where in the process of kind of rejecting that and throwing it out, we're defining how things ought to be, which is the opposite, of the way things have been, and in the process, inevitably throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well.
It's a very strong configuration, isn't it, to fall to this place of, we know what's right now. We know the way we're supposed to go on the planet. And it's the first time that we live in this era now where we genuinely think in a planetary way, in a global manner, because of the obvious reasons, our technology, our extremely fast communications and interactions and everything. But it's also enabled a kind of righteousness from all sides of politics to arise even more so. How would you configure that with Graves' work? Again, it's some kind of obvious showing of what transformation is actually happening on the planet, isn't it? There's this.
It's a clear sign for sure, yeah. And we need to remember that in each of the first 6 value systems in the first tier, as it's called, each has its own compulsive behaviour. And so we're moving from one set of compulsions to a completely different set of compulsions. And we also have this regressive values search process going on. So in this case, we're harping back to mostly previous communal systems, which is useful in that it helps us to remember how to live in community and the kind of things that need to change to allow that to happen in harmony. And also by going back and trying out these old value systems, they inevitably fail to solve our current problems, even more so than the most immediate previous value system is failing. And so in that way, it speeds up the evolutionary process, it speeds up the change process. And I always talk about the elastic band on the slingshot. You've got to pull it backwards and create that tension in order to actually get it to go forwards to any great effect. And so the same thing's playing out here, and we're seeing a strong rejection of the old values, really, really strong opinions on what needs to change and what we need to get rid of. And in the process, there's a lot of fear being generated and a lot of irrational ideas and behaviour, because they're coming from this inherent rejection and inherent fear of things not changing, and fear of the implications of the problems that have been created by the old value system. And how they might play out. So it really is a bit of a crazy time and quite chaotic, and it's a good time to kind of sit back as best as you can and just be curious about what's going on and what we might be doing.
You have a certain a little habit I might betray to the listener on our one of our platforms that we use to talk amongst our team about various issues, and you have a little icon of popcorn, which you like to place there quite often with regards to exactly what you're saying. We should be just sit back with the popcorn and observe.
It's a good time to be investing in popcorn shares, I think, actually.
It's interesting too, because the word utopia is a loaded word, naturally, like so many words now, and in some ways it carries a lot of baggage. It has been quite a negative terminology in recent times. In fact, I think the word dystopia, which is a word coined by John Stuart Mill 3.5 centuries ago, after the publication of More's book, in fact, in response to that, described a society that was too bad to be practicable, which you could argue is kind of where we are now. And yet, at the same time, in recent years, from this same article from the New Yorker, literary Marxist Frederick Jamison observes that in the last years, utopia has again changed its meaning and has become the rallying cry for left and progressive forces, which I was sort of referring to before. So, yes, there is a way, there's a utopian way, and this is the way to get there, and we just have to get rid of all this other stuff, and then we cut away all that, and we can move forward into this. Clearly, this is the way it has to go.
It's interesting language, isn't it? I mean, looking back a decade or two, utopian was a criticism. It was used as a criticism,
exactly.
Wasn't it? You say, it's too utopian. Don't be utopian.
Precisely.
Because it was seen as being unrealistic, a description of unrealistic things.
Yes, one of the other researchers is quoted here as saying, in fact, on the other side, that there's, in this era, according to his name is Jennings, there's a deficit of imagination in our era, and argues that uncoupled from utopian ends, even the most incisive social critique falls short. In other words, we need a utopian vision to get somewhere. But things will only get worse if we don't engage in some serious utopian thinking. What about that?
Well, I think there's some truth in that, absolutely.
Yeah.
What it comes down to is that sort of transition beyond the utopian vision to practical application is where it often falls down. Yeah. And it is true also that the emerging value system, which is really still forming to a large extent this relativistic system, as Graves called it, which some people have also called postmodern, although the term postmodern was really coined in the earliest stages of emergence of this value system, and so it reflected a very immature, early stage version of relativistic.
Yes, and it's a very academic
thinking.
Terminology also. It kind of is restricted and doesn't, I don't think, had for a long time much sort of weight within society itself. Actually, it was a concept. It was an intellectual concept that was academic in its configuration.
It's true, yeah. One of the characteristics of the relativistic value system, though, is that it collapses hierarchies, and that is really a reaction to the dominant hierarchies that have emerged during the scientific industrial era, which are seen to be damaging and not useful anymore, which to a large extent is quite true, because this is the way that value systems play themselves out. They're immediately useful when they're first emerging and becoming effective, because they solve the complex problems that have emerged from the previous value system, and then they go through a kind of a bell curve where they'll reach a peak and then start to die off, and during that the process of dying off, they often start to create new problems which are more complex, which can only be solved by the emergence of a successive value system. And so in the process of the emergence of the relativistic values, we're seeing a tendency to want to collapse hierarchies because they're seen as being bad. And generally the idea of hierarchy is thought of only in terms of dominant hierarchies, not in terms of nurturing hierarchies.
Yes.
Right, which are like the feminine version.
That's great. Yeah, that's really good. So take that in, folks. Think about that for a second.
Yeah, and this is something that's often missed, is people think hierarchy, they think dominant, but not all hierarchies are dominant. Some hierarchies are nurturing, like a mother-child hierarchy is a nurturing hierarchy, for example, and nature is full of nurturing
Nature's
hierarchy.
full of nurturing hierarchy, exactly.
Yeah. But in the process of collapsing hierarchies altogether, it does literally throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we lose any hierarchical cause and effect relationship, and so it makes problem solving difficult in many cases. And right at the moment, it's resulting in the collapse of much of the scientific method within the particular discipline. And so we are losing and confusing those cause and effect relationships, which inevitably will, within a decade or two, I predict, to create considerable chaos that will only be resolved by the emergence of second-tier consciousness.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Just another quote from Mr. Jennings. Chris Jennings actually is the author in this New Yorker article of a book called Paradise Now, The Story of American Utopianism, a historical account of 5 utopian projects. And that's an interesting story in itself. If you want to check that out, the New Yorker will post this article, because there is quite a tradition in America of utopianism going back, particularly in the 19th century, but also moving through into this century quite a lot.
Yeah, I think the birth of America was, in a sense, this idea of creating a free utopian kind of society.
Manifest destiny,
yeah,
is what they called it, and still I think that term is taught, I think, in schools. This notion that America actually has this destiny to be this utopian, democratic, new world society, which for a long time you could argue was, but somewhere along the line things have fallen apart, as they do.
Yeah.
Jennings, I was just going to quote this last part with regards to whether, how we engage with this. He says that society seems like something that needs to be invented rather than merely endured. And I like that. Like, we actually have capacity to make change. We have capacity to make choice. We have capacity to actually solve the problems. And I think there's part of us now that has given up. I think, I'm generalising hugely here, but a lot of people, particularly with regards to, for example, the climate issues, are becoming so negative and dark and dystopian about things that there really isn't the kind of quashing that potential in every human being to actually create the future in one way or the other.
It's a very challenging time that we're in, because we are in this transition period between value systems, and what needs to happen for a new value system to emerge is we need to let go of our old values, and that's like letting go of your anchor points, and allowing yourself to drift with really no control, at the whim of the sort of winds and the tides, and that is a very scary place to be, but it's a necessary place for this transition process to take place. And I think that's why, so many people are feeling confused, afraid about an unknown future, and really becoming more desperate actually, for something to hang on to, and so they're grabbing hold of whatever crops up to see if it'll work. And there's also inevitably a process and a period of experimentation with new values and new ideas. And what if we try this? What if we try that? And part of that process is this regressive search back to old values to see if we dig those out, maybe they'll work. If we just give them one more try, like Make America Great Again, for example, is a good example of that.
Yes, very interesting. And have a look at yourselves, folks out there. Where are you in regards to this? Because we're certainly not saying that this is wrong. I think what I'm hearing as you speak there, Steve, is this confusion, this uncertainty, this insecurity that is prevalent in everybody to some degree, arguably. Perhaps you disagree, but I think it's true. Is actually a signpost of our increasing capacity, essentially.
Look, it's actually a signpost of progress, believe it or not. Yeah. I mean, and the only way to really make sense of this is to step back and look at the patterns of change. And this is where a second-tier perspective becomes extremely critical, actually, and certainly will become more critical in the decades ahead, is we have to be able to step back and see the process that we're in. Yeah. We've got to make that sort of subject-object transition so our subjective experience actually becomes the object of our observation and understanding. And then once we can see that, okay, when we go through these paradigm shifts between value systems, we always go through this kind of no man's land where we've let go of the old values. We don't quite know what the new ones are. They're still forming. And that's a period of great discomfort and often chaos traditionally. But if we could actually see that pattern and realize, okay, we're there, and we're in between this and that, it becomes psychologically much more easy, I think, if we can know that we're in transition between this place and that place, and we've got to cross this barren area where there are no real anchor points for us to have.
Yeah, I think it's actually really great to see what you said before there. I'm just trying to remember, you said about subjective experience, that one's subjective experience becomes the object of inquiry, of observation, in order to actually see what real relationship that's not flavoured by, covered by, or mitigated by societal and everything else, cultural imprints upon us, but actually what is our really true subjective experience in the moment.
And some people talk about these major transitions as a kind of death, and interestingly people report having this experience when they go through a near-death experience where they'll be immersed in the experience of dying, and then all of a sudden they'll find themselves above, looking down on what's going on. And in that process, there's a kind of peace that emerges. And we don't need to literally die to be able to do this. We just need to learn that transcendent process, through self-development, so we can actually step back and just be aware of the dynamics that we're subjected to, rather than being sort of carried away and immersed and drowning, so to speak, in them.
Yeah.
And certainly there's a lot of that going on in the world at the moment, and absolutely here in Australia, where we're subject to incredible forces of nature and the change that they bring.
And we'll come back to some of that, I think, in the next part of the show. Take a break shortly. Just finish on Utopia, this part from the New Yorker article. Just quote this last little piece here, because I think it's interesting that this new configuration of utopia is arising for the reasons we're talking about. Modern-day utopians are not blind to the lessons of history. Many of them see the limits posed by human nature and recognise that utopia has always veered between evil and futility. Yet, at least implicitly, they seem to view the price of utopia, the disruptions of sweeping change, the inevitable turmoil of total overhaul, worth paying. And it finishes saying a quote from Mao, from Chairman Mao, who said, "A revolution is not a dinner party." And I think that's it. We are faced with such, whether utopia or not, to get to some other place that we're seeking now to solve the problems that we have on this planet now is such a huge revolution. It's such a sweeping change. It is incredibly disruptive. There is incredible turmoil and overhaul. These things are not going to change. And in some senses, I see we have to accept that it isn't a dinner party. Revolution is happening one way or the other, and it's not going to be easy.
I think a key part of the reason that it looks so difficult at the moment is because people are trying to figure out ways of solving our very, very complex problems using old thinking.
Yes.
And, that famous Einstein quote where you don't solve a problem at the same level of thinking that created it, but we're attempting to do that at the moment, and that's why we're having such a hard time as a species.
Indeed. Thanks for your text. Another text came in. It's helpful to be proactive, not reactive, for one's soul and our fellow man and woman. Yeah, well, that's absolutely
very true.
Thank you.
Indeed.
You're resonating right now on Future Sense with Steve McDonald and Nick Jeans. You're tuned to Future Sense here with Steve McDonald and myself, Nick Jeans, through till 11 o'clock this morning. Thanks again for your texts on 0437341119. Rod has written in, "Hi guys, infinite change is the only constant." Yeah, constant is the only change in the universe. Change is the only constant in the universe. One of those.
Everything's change.
Thank you.
It's true. For those of you who might be listening to the podcast later, we record this as a radio show in beautiful Byron Bay here in Australia, and Nick and I always get together about 7 a.m. Our radio show goes on here at 9 a.m. and we have a coffee and breakfast and talk about what we're going to talk about. And this morning when we were doing that, an email dropped in my inbox from a friend of mine called Gary Sikalik, who's associated with the Arlington Institute in West Virginia. G'day, Gary, if you're listening. And thanks for the emails that you send me all the time. They're wonderful. And the heading on this email was "The Hypersane are among us." And
Hypersane. Okay, no, that's another good concept. I like it. So
Gary's email led me to this article at aeon.co called "The Hypersane are among us if only we're prepared to look." And it's a short post about a new book by a psychiatrist and philosopher called Neil Burton, N-E-E-L Burton. And Neil is a fellow of Green Templeton College at the University of Oxford, and he's published a book this year called Hypersanity, Thinking Beyond Thinking. And that really sort of captured my interest because one of the characteristics of this transition from first tier to second tier consciousness is moving beyond the domination of the rational mind and moving beyond rational thinking as our most capable form of problem solving.
Yeah.
And so I might just read a little bit from this post. And it says here, this is Neil Burton, the author, writing, "Hypersanity is not a common or accepted term, but neither did I make it up. I first came across the concept while training in psychiatry in a book by R.D. Laing."
So yes, R.D. Laing. I've actually read that book, Politics of Experience, a long time ago.
Politics of Experience, The Bird of Paradise, 1967, yeah.
Scottish psychiatrist he was, yeah.
That's right, and he presented madness as a voyage of discovery that could open out onto a free state of higher consciousness or hypersanity. And, wasn't that an appropriate kind of idea for modern life, where we seem to be living in an insane world?
And certainly, I guess in 1967, in the first psychedelic revolution, that book was written, so that very reflective in a way of that era too, just that. That madness actually could lead to a reckoning, to an awakening, to a breakthrough rather than a breakdown.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly I think that's been the experience of many people. And whenever we go through these paradigm shifts or value shifts from one layer to the next, often we go through a kind of dark night of the soul and associated with what we've been talking about, everything falling apart, the realization that our values no longer solve or serve to solve our problems, and we find ourselves in this kind of lost no man's land kind of state. The Langian concept of hypersanity has ancient roots. Neil goes on to write in this post here, and once upon being asked to name the most beautiful of all things, Diogenes the Cynic, who was around from about 412 BCE, he replied, "Parrhesia," which in ancient Greek means something like uninhibited thought, free speech, or full expression.
Yeah.
And the idea that R.D. Laing's putting forward here is the need to move beyond logical, rational thought to something different, some other way of knowing.
Yeah, well, Laing also talks in the same book about the condition of alienation, which has really no solution other than exactly this sort of hypersanity, this other kind of approach. He says the condition of alienation, of being asleep, of being unconscious, of being out of one's mind, is the condition of the normal man. Society highly values its normal man. It educates children to lose themselves and to become absurd, and thus to be normal. Normal men have killed perhaps 100 million of their fellow normal men in the last 50 years, and that brings it right back down to...
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this kind of crazy realization is typical of what we encounter in a values shift, is this sudden shift of values where the things that we thought were important are no longer important, it seems, and we look back on them and often in horror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some wonderful quotes actually from this book. It's funny because I did read it way back then, and that idea that we are now really needing a different kind of sanity, a hyper-sanity. It's a very interesting terminology actually, because it infers beyond either or. It infers beyond right and wrong. It infers a paradoxical approach to intelligence, to be able to take in a number of different elements that come from completely different paradigms that all may have some sort of value in a total picture of any given problem. These kind of notions, yeah? Yeah,
it's very interesting. It sounds a lot like the trans-rational zone, which is described in Claire Graves' research, which is the zone beyond the domination of the rational mind, where we move into a kind of deep intuition or a direct knowing, which I sometimes call a quantum consciousness, because it's as if we, just like a quantum... the quantum behavior of a particle, where it can kind of disappear and reappear. It's like we can reach into that quantum realm and drag something straight out and immediately know without having to go through a process of logic.
Yes. I mean, in this article, he also talks about some of the modern examples of the hyper-sane, and I think I like the Dalai Lama really stood out straight away to me, because the Dalai Lama certainly has a kind of intelligence clearly that just jumps across the abyss here and there everywhere, and simply doesn't respond in the sort of normal sane way that most people would respond.
I'm sure the Dalai Lama would be delighted to hear your praise of his kind of intelligence.
He'd have a good chuckle and go, it's all you. You're exactly the same. Oh, me. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It seems to be really appropriate for the present day. Another line from this post by Neil here: we could all go mad in a way we already are, minus the promise.
And that's interesting, isn't it? The promise. And what is the promise about? Is that the promise of finding some resolution, some utopia from our thinking, or just, is that what he's referring to? Maybe.
I don't know. I guess, he's talking about this dark night of the soul process, I think, alluding to that sort of Jungian idea that we go into the crazy place and then come out the other side more sane than we were when we went in, which is certainly, the experience of many, many people.
And, it's been said quite often that madness and brilliance, madness and genius are two sides of the same coin. I think this is exactly what's going on here. And I always think when I'm talking about these kind of topics of the word education, mentioned children before, that Lang talked about, and how we teach our children to be normal in that sense. And education, of course, actually comes from the Latin educare, which means to draw out, means to bring out the unique and special qualities and abilities of that one child, not to thrust forth and inculcate our children with the versions of society and culture that dominate them, that we like to see reiterated. So that notion of drawing out is something that's very challenging, I think, for the education system, and it is a turn that's going to happen now. There's so many children now that I know of, children of friends of mine, particularly younger than and also teenage children, who are simply not coping with the way that society actually configures education for them anymore. It just doesn't work in the same way anymore for so many kids. And that's a really telling response that's going on in the world, I think, at the moment.
It is, absolutely. I love this word, hypersanity, and I'm going to use that. And I was so impressed that I've actually gone online and bought the book this morning. So
oh, my goodness.
I'll report back later after I read it.
That's great. A couple of other texts quickly come in. I'm not sure exactly what you mean here, but I like it. A more upful a man is in his heart. The more upful a man is in his heart, the more ancient he appears on the outside. Take a moment for that one. And someone else says, Einstein said, children are born intelligent, then we educate them. Yes, it's funny because I had another Einstein quote up here. We're talking about hypersanity. Einstein said, if at first an idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it.
That's right. That's right. Very much in line with this final quote from this post on hypersanity. which I will leave us with. Both psychosis and hypersanity place us outside society, making us seem mad to the mainstream. How true is that?
And of course, there's another great quote, quote where ideas are originally considered completely crazy, and then they're slowly adopted, and then they become the more of the day. And I think that's, we're at a stage in human evolution, clearly, where we need a whole bunch of absolutely brand new ideas to flood through our system and to create new systems. Exactly that.
Very true.
You've been listening to Future Sense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. Future Sense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.